My name is Grace. I'm 17 years old and my family thinks I'm strong. They think I understand everything and don't need help. What they don't see is how much I'm holding together in silence. I'm not breaking loudly, I'm breaking quietly. In her house, silence wasn't peaceful, it wasn't comforting, it didn't mean rest. It meant something was wrong, but no one was brave enough to say it out loud. The house stood still every morning as if holding its breath. Grace noticed it most before sunrise when the walls felt heavier and the air pressed against her chest. She would lie awake in her bed, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling above her, listening. No footsteps, no laughter, no good mornings. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the clock in the hallway, counting seconds that no one acknowledged. Grace pulled her blanket tighter around herself and waited for the day to begin. She was 17, but some mornings she felt much older, other mornings painfully younger. Down the hall, her parents' bedroom door remained closed. It was always closed now. There was a time, years ago, when it used to stay open, when laughter spilled out into the hallway and music played softly on Sunday mornings. Grace remembered waking up to the smell of coffee and toast, to her mother humming off-key, to her father teasing her about sleeping too late. Those memories felt like borrowed dreams now. Grace slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. She had memorized which ones complained and which ones stayed obedient. She moved like a guest in her own home, respectful, cautious, invisible. In the kitchen, she began her routine. She packed lunches. She washed the dishes left from last night. She checked the fridge, already knowing it would be nearly empty. Her younger sister Mia shuffled in, hair messy, eyes half closed. "Morning," Mia mumbled. Grace smiled instantly, a reflex. "Morning, sleepyhead." Mia climbed into a chair, swinging her legs. "Did Mom wake up yet?" Grace shook her head gently. "Not yet." Mia nodded as if this were normal, as if it didn't matter. Grace poured cereal into a bowl and slid it toward her sister. She watched Mia eat, crumbs collecting at the corner of her mouth, and felt a familiar ache in her chest. She shouldn't have to get used to this, Grace thought, but she was. Grace had always been the easy one. She didn't cry much, she didn't ask for things, she didn't cause trouble. Teachers praised her for being mature, neighbors admired her politeness, relatives compared her favorably to other children, calling her a blessing. No one ever asked why she was so quiet. When her father lost his job 3 years ago, the house changed overnight. The walls didn't look different, but they felt different, like they were listening, judging, remembering. Arguments started quietly at first, whispered conversations behind closed doors, tense looks exchanged across the dinner table. Grace learned to read expressions instead of words. Her mother, Evelyn, grew sharper around the edges, always tired, always rushing. Love became something practical, food on the table, clothes washed, bills paid late but paid. Her father, Daniel, grew smaller somehow, quieter. He sat for hours staring at the television without really watching it. When Grace spoke to him, he answered kindly but distantly, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Grace adapted. She helped more, she spoke less. She felt everything. When her brother Lucas left for college, Grace stood in his empty room and felt the house tilt slightly, like a boat missing its anchor. "Take care of them," Lucas had whispered to her before leaving. She nodded, even though no one should have asked that of her. That night, Grace lay in bed pretending to sleep. The voices came around midnight. Her parents didn't shout anymore. Shouting required energy. What they had now was resignation. "We can't keep doing this," her mother said quietly. "I know," her father replied. His voice sounded tired, cracked at the edges. Grace turned onto her side, pressing her ear against the wall. "We're drowning," Evelyn continued. "And the kids, they see everything." Grace closed her eyes. "Mia's too young," Daniel said. "But Grace, she understands." That sentence settled heavily in Grace's chest. Grace understands. It was always said like a compliment, like armor, like permission to overlook her. "She's strong," her mother added. "She'll be fine." Grace felt something twist inside her, sharp, sudden, painful, strong. She bit her lip, forcing herself not to cry. Tears felt too loud for a house that survived on quiet suffering. In the dark, Grace whispered to herself, so softly she could barely hear it, "I'm tired." At school, Grace blended into the background like pale sunlight through a window, present but rarely noticed. She sat in the same seat every day, second row from the back, close enough to hear but far enough to disappear. Teachers knew her name because her grades were good. Classmates knew her face but not her thoughts. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when expected, and never raised her hand unless she was absolutely certain. Grace had learned that needing nothing was safer than needing too much. During lunch, she sat with friends who talked loudly about weekend plans and small heartbreaks. Grace listened. She always listened, they loved her for that. "You're such a good listener," they told her. She wondered if anyone would notice if she ever spoke. That afternoon, her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Mom, can you pick up Mia after school? I'm running late." Grace typed back okay without hesitation. She always did. Evelyn didn't mean to lean on Grace, that's what she told herself. Life had become a constant race, work, bills, exhaustion. There was no room left for softness, not even for guilt. Grace was reliable, Grace understood, Grace never complained. Sometimes, Evelyn forgot Grace was still a child. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table while Mia colored quietly nearby. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I try so hard, Grace." Grace looked up from her homework. Her mother's eyes were tired, red-rimmed, searching. "You're doing your best," Grace said automatically. Evelyn exhaled sharply like she had been holding her breath all day. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Grace swallowed. She wanted to say "I need you too," but the words stayed locked inside her chest. Grace started waking up exhausted. Sleep came easily, but rest never followed. Her dreams were filled with unfinished conversations and doors that wouldn't open. She woke with a tightness in her chest, like something was sitting on her lungs. Her grades slipped not dramatically, just enough to worry her teachers. "Everything okay at home?" one of them asked gently. Grace smiled. Yes, it was the easiest lie she knew. At night, she returned to her journal, but the pages stayed mostly empty. When she tried to write, the words felt too heavy, too real. If I write it down, she thought, it becomes true, so she stopped. The house was asleep, that was what Grace thought at first. The lights were off, the hallway dim except for the soft glow spilling from beneath her parents' bedroom door. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., too late for conversations, too late for anything important. Grace had gotten out of bed for water, nothing more, just a small, ordinary reason. She never made it to the kitchen. Her mother's voice drifted through the hallway, low and tired. "We can't keep pretending this is fine." Grace stopped walking. She didn't mean to listen. She really didn't, but her feet rooted to the carpet and her hand tightened around the empty glass. Her father replied after a long pause. "I know." There was something in his voice that made Grace's chest tighten, not anger, not frustration, but defeat. "We're falling behind again," Evelyn continued. "Bills, rent, everything." "I'm exhausted, Daniel. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Grace leaned slightly against the wall. Her parents' arguing used to scare her. Now it scared her more when they didn't. Daniel sighed. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to admit we need help." Silence followed. Grace held her breath without realizing it. "And the kids?" her mother added quietly. "They see more than we think." Grace swallowed. "Mia's too young," Daniel said. "She'll be okay." Grace waited. Her name came next. "But Grace," he hesitated. "Grace understands." The words landed softly, and somehow they hurt more than shouting ever had. "She's strong," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "She always has been." Grace felt something inside her shift, a small crack forming, slow and precise. Strong, that word again. They said it like reassurance, like justification, like permission. "We might need to send her to my sister S for a while," Evelyn continued. "Just until things stabilize, she'd understand. It wouldn't hurt her like it would Mia." Grace's fingers loosened. The glass slipped from her hand. It didn't shatter, it landed on the carpet with a dull thud. No one noticed. Her parents kept talking. They didn't know their daughter stood just feet away, learning something she would never forget. "I am the one who can be moved." Not because she was unwanted, but because she was manageable. Grace stepped back slowly, each movement careful, deliberate, like she might break if she moved too fast. Her heart didn't race, her breath didn't hitch. That came later. Right now, there was only numbness. She returned to her room and closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of her bed, stared at the wall, the cracked wall she had stared at for years. "I would have stayed," she whispered to no one. "I would have handled it." That was the cruelest part. She would have. She lay down without turning off the light. The brightness hurt her eyes, but she welcomed it. Pain felt grounding. Strong people didn't cry, so Grace didn't. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, learning a new rule she would carry for years. If you're strong enough, you are also expendable. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something quietly finally broke. Grace perfected the art of smiling, at school, at home, at the dinner table. Her laughter sounded right, timed perfectly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mia didn't notice. Children rarely do. Her father noticed, but didn't know what to do. "Everything okay, kiddo?" he asked one evening. Grace nodded. He accepted it with visible relief. Lucas came home unexpectedly on a Friday night. Grace heard his laugh before she saw him, loud and familiar, filling the house like oxygen. For a moment, the walls seemed lighter. He hugged her tightly, too tightly. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Grace hesitated. "I'm fine," she said. Lucas pulled back, studying her face. "No, you're not." Something in his voice, soft, knowing, made her throat tighten, but she shook her head and smiled again. "I'm just tired." Grace was walking down the school hallway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the sound of lockers slamming echoing around her. Voices blurred together, laughter, complaints, fragments of conversations that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Her chest tightened. She paused, fingers curling around the strap of her bag. Breathe, she told herself. The air felt thick, heavy, like it didn't want to move into her lungs. Her heart began to race, not fast exactly but wrong. Each beat slammed against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Grace swallowed. You're okay, she thought. You're fine, just tired. She took another step, the hallway tilted. Suddenly, everything felt too loud. The lights overhead buzzed harshly, drilling into her skull. The walls seemed to stretch and close in at the same time. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her hands started to shake. Grace pressed her palm against the cool metal of a locker, grounding herself, but the cold sent a jolt through her body. Her fingers tingled, numb and burning all at once. Her breath came out in short, shallow gasps. Why can't I breathe? Fear flooded her, sharp, overwhelming, absolute. She tried to inhale deeply, but her lungs refused to cooperate. Each breath felt incomplete, useless. Something's wrong, something's really wrong. A voice in her head whispered the word she had never allowed herself to think. Dying. Grace slid down the locker and sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Students walked past her at first, glancing briefly before looking away. She didn't blame them. She had learned how to disappear. Her heart pounded harder, faster, louder. She could hear it in her ears now, a relentless drumbeat drowning out everything else. Her chest hurt, not emotionally, physically, tight, crushing, like invisible hands were squeezing her lungs. Tears spilled down her face, hot and uncontrollable. I can't, she whispered. I can't do this. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her jeans, desperate for something solid, something real. The world began to feel unreal, sounds distorted. The floor felt too far away, her body too light, too detached. This isn't real, she thought desperately. I'm not real. Her breaths became frantic, shallow, painful. Each one made the fear worse. Please stop, she begged silently. Please, a teacher's voice cut through the chaos. Are you sad? Grace hesitated, then nodded. Mia wrapped her arms around her tightly. It's okay, she said seriously. I get sad too. Grace smiled through tears. Therapy felt strange at first, sitting in a room where feelings were expected, not hidden. Grace learned new words. Boundaries, burnout, emotional neglect, none of them sounded dramatic. All of them felt painfully accurate. You learned to disappear, her therapist said gently. Now you're learning to exist. Grace wrote that sentence down. Her parents argued again one night. But this time they talked, they apologized, they listened. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes they slipped back into old habits. Sometimes Grace still went quiet, but now silence was noticed. Grace stopped volunteering for everything. She said no. The first time it terrified her. The second time it felt powerful. Strength, she realized, wasn't about endurance, it was about honesty. When Lucas left again, he hugged her longer. Call me, he said, anytime. I will, Grace promised, and she meant it. Grace stood in the hallway late one night, listening to the house breathe. The walls were still cracked, the past still lingered, but she no longer felt alone inside them. Grace placed her hand against the wall and smiled softly. Healing wasn't loud, but it was real. Grace didn't realize how deeply the habit lived in her until she tried to stop. It was a Tuesday evening, ordinary in every way. The sky outside her bedroom window had turned a muted gray-blue, the kind that made the house feel smaller, closer. Grace sat on her bed with her laptop open, notes scattered across the blanket, a deadline blinking silently at the top of the screen. She was behind. Not by much, just enough to feel the pressure tightening in her chest. From the kitchen came the sound of cabinets opening and closing too quickly. Her mother's movements carried that familiar edge, sharp and restless. Grace's body responded before her mind did. She closed her laptop halfway and stood. She was already halfway down the hallway when she stopped. Her therapist's voice echoed in her head, gentle but firm. Notice when you move automatically. Grace froze, one hand brushing the wall for balance. Ask yourself why. Why was she going to the kitchen? Because her mother was stressed. Because things felt tense. Because fixing things had always been her role. Grace inhaled slowly. I don't have to. The thought felt wrong, dangerous, like stepping off a ledge she'd stood on her entire life. Still, she walked into the kitchen. Evelyn stood at the counter, papers spread everywhere, bills, envelopes, lists. Her shoulders were tight, her mouth set in a thin line. Oh, she said when she noticed Grace. I didn't hear you. Grace hesitated. The old version of herself would have asked what was wrong, would have offered help. Would have absorbed the stress like it belonged to her. Her throat tightened. Mom, Grace said quietly. Evelyn looked up. Can you help me sort these? I'm running out of time, and Grace's heart began to pound. Not like the panic attack. This was slower, heavier, a warning. She thought of her open laptop, her unfinished work. The exhaustion that had followed her for weeks. I can't tonight, Grace said. The words felt foreign on her tongue. Evelyn blinked. What, I can't help tonight, Grace repeated, her voice barely steady. I need to finish something for school. The silence that followed was brief, only a second or two, but it stretched painfully. Oh, her mother said finally. Okay, that was it, no argument. No disappointment spoken aloud, but guilt flooded Grace instantly, hot and overwhelming. It hit her chest, her stomach, her throat, everywhere at once. She nodded quickly and left the kitchen before she could change her mind. Back in her room, Grace closed the door and leaned against it, breathing shallowly. Her hands were shaking. You did something wrong, a voice whispered inside her. You left her alone. She slid down to the floor and hugged her knees to her chest. Her phone buzzed on her bed, a message from her mother. Mom, don't worry about me, focus on your work. Grace stared at the screen, the message was kind, supportive, and somehow that made the guilt worse. Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to run back into the kitchen, to apologize, to say she'd changed her mind, to restore the balance she'd broken. Instead, she stayed on the floor and cried. Not because she'd been yelled at, but because choosing herself felt like betrayal. After a while, the crying softened into quiet hiccups. Grace wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater and forced herself to stand. She returned to her bed, opened her laptop fully this time. Her work blurred at first, but gradually her focus returned. The house remained quiet, no doors slammed, no voices raised, nothing fell apart. Later that night, Grace passed her mother in the hallway. Evelyn paused. How did your work go? Grace hesitated, then answered honestly. I finished. Her mother smiled, tired but genuine. I'm proud of you. The words settled slowly, gently. Grace nodded and went to her room. She lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, heart still aching. Setting boundaries didn't feel empowering. It felt lonely. It felt selfish. It felt wrong, but underneath the guilt there was something else, faint, fragile, unfamiliar, relief. And Grace realized something important. Just because guilt shows up doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. Sometimes it just means you chose differently than before. Grace's therapist warned her. Setting boundaries often feels like hurting people, she said gently. Especially when you've been taught that love means sacrifice. That night when her mother asked her to skip studying to help with extra work, Grace hesitated. I can't tonight, she said quietly. I need to focus on school. Evelyn blinked, surprised. Oh, okay, she replied. That was it, no anger, no disappointment. Grace went to her room and cried anyway. Grace's greatest fear wasn't loneliness, it was being too much. She'd learned that lesson young, that love was conditional, fragile, dependent on how little space you took up. When she started opening up more, that fear followed her like a shadow. What if they got tired again? What if she asked for too much? She almost pulled back, almost. Grace wrote the letter at 2 in the morning. The house was quiet in the way only sleeping houses are, not peaceful, just paused. The hallway light seeped under her door, casting a thin line across the floor. Grace sat cross-legged on her bed, journal open on her lap, pen hovering uselessly above the page. She hadn't planned to write. She'd opened the journal to distract herself, to pretend she was fine. But the blank page felt like an invitation she was too tired to refuse, so she began. I don't know how to say this out loud. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, the ink pressing deeper into the paper. I learned early that my feelings took up too much space. The words came faster after that, like something long trapped finally finding a crack. She wrote about the nights she lay awake listening to arguments through walls. About how she learned to measure love by how little she asked for. About becoming the safe child, the quiet one, the one who didn't add weight to an already collapsing house. She didn't censor herself. She wrote about resentment, the kind that made her feel ashamed. She wrote about fear, the kind that never left. She wrote about exhaustion, bone deep, invisible, relentless. Telling me I was strong didn't make me feel strong, she wrote. It made me feel alone. Tears dripped onto the page, blurring the ink. Grace wiped them away impatiently and kept going. She wrote until her hand cramped and her chest ached. When she finished, the journal felt heavier in her hands. Grace closed it slowly. She didn't feel better, but she felt real, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. She slid the journal under her pillow and turned off the light. In the darkness, she whispered, you mattered. She didn't know who she was saying it to, maybe the girl she used to be. Mia asked the question while brushing her teeth. Grace leaned against the bathroom counter, watching her sister stand on a stool, face dotted with toothpaste foam. The mirror reflected them both, Mia small and bright-eyed, Grace taller, quieter, carrying more than her reflection showed. Are you happier now? Mia asked suddenly. Grace blinked. What? Mia shrugged, still brushing. You smile different. Grace's throat tightened. She hadn't realized anyone noticed. I don't know, Grace said honestly. Mia spit into the sink and wiped her mouth. I think you are. Grace knelt so they were eye level. Why do you think that? Mia thought for a moment. You don't look tired all the time anymore. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. Children saw everything. That night after Mia fell asleep, Grace sat on the edge of her sister's bed and watched her breathe. Slow, steady, safe, I'm trying, Grace whispered. Her mother started saying it like she was afraid the words might disappear if she didn't. I love you, in the kitchen, in passing, before bed. At first, Grace didn't know how to respond. The words felt unfamiliar, like shoes that hadn't been worn in years. One evening, Evelyn said it softly while handing Grace a mug of tea. Grace froze. Then quietly she replied, I love you too. The words felt strange and healing. Her father struggled more. Affection didn't come easily to him. Years of failure had made him cautious, withdrawn. But one night, as Grace studied at the dining table, he paused behind her chair. I'm proud of you, he said gruffly. Grace looked up. He was already walking away. Her hands shook for a long time after. The college acceptance email arrived on a rainy afternoon. Grace stared at the screen, heart pounding. She'd applied quietly without expectation. The campus was far enough to feel like freedom, close enough to not feel like abandonment. Congratulations. Grace pressed a hand over her mouth. When she told her parents, fear flickered across their faces, brief, honest, human, but no one stopped her. You deserve this, her mother said. Grace nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. For once, choosing herself didn't feel wrong. The walls didn't change, but the energy did. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then real. Arguments still happened, silence still visited. But now silence was a pause, not a punishment. Grace noticed the difference. Grace lay in bed on her final night at home, suitcase packed, room stripped down to memories. The wall above her bed still bore its familiar crack. She traced it with her eyes. This room had held her sadness, her silence, her strength. It had also held her survival. Grace pressed her palm to the wall. Thank you, she whispered, not for the pain, but for the girl who endured it. The morning Grace left, her family stood together in the driveway, hugs lingered. Tears fell, I'll call, Grace said, and this time she knew she would. As the car pulled away, Grace looked back at the house. The walls were still imperfect, but they no longer defined her. Grace learned that healing doesn't erase the past, it redefines it. She carried her family with her, the good, the broken, the love that learned how to speak too late but spoke anyway. She was no longer the quiet girl holding walls together. She was her own foundation, and that was Grace. Grace, she didn't respond. The hallway had faded into noise and color. All she could feel was the terror, raw and endless. Strong people didn't fall apart like this. Strong people didn't lose control. That thought hurt more than the fear itself. Someone knelt in front of her. She felt hands on her shoulders, steady but distant. Look at me, the voice said calmly. You're safe, safe. The word didn't make sense. Grace squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing. I can't breathe, she gasped. I think I'm dying. You're not, the voice said firmly. You're having a panic attack. The word meant nothing to her then. All she knew was fear. They guided her to lie down, lifted her legs slightly. Someone pressed a paper bag into her trembling hands. Slow breaths, they instructed. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Grace tried. Her breath stuttered, resisted, fought her. But slowly, painfully, they began to slow. Her heart still raced, but it no longer felt like it would tear her apart. The hallway returned in fragments. The ceiling lights, the floor beneath her, the sound of someone calling her name. She lay there, drained, empty, embarrassed. Tears continued to fall silently. I wasn't strong enough, she thought. The thought stayed with her long after the fear faded. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Grace lay on the narrow bed, a thin blanket pulled up to her chest, wires taped to her skin. The room was too bright, too quiet, like the world had paused just to watch her breathe. Her mother sat on one side of the bed, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her father stood near the window, staring outside as if answers might be written in the parking lot below. No one spoke. Grace felt strangely calm, empty. As if whatever had been weighing on her chest had finally spilled out, leaving only exhaustion behind. I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered suddenly. Grace turned her head. I should have seen it, her mother continued, tears sliding down her face. You've been carrying too much. Grace opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know how to explain years of quiet pain in a single moment. The doctor's voice was calm, practiced, gentle in the way people become when they are trained to deliver truths that hurt. Panic attacks can feel life-threatening, she explained, standing at the foot of the bed, but they're the body's response to prolonged stress. Especially in young people who suppress their emotions. Grace stared at the white ceiling above her, following a tiny crack that branched like a vein. Her chest still felt sore, as if she'd been running for hours. Her mother sat beside her, unmoving. Her father stood near the window, arms crossed tightly as though holding himself together. Is she going to be okay? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Yes, the doctor said, but she needs support and space to speak. The word speak echoed painfully in Grace's mind. After the doctor left, the room felt heavier. No machines beeped loudly, no alarms rang, just the soft hum of the building and the sound of three people breathing around unspoken truths. Her father broke the silence first. She never said anything, he murmured almost to himself. Grace felt something sharp bloom in her chest. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him, he seemed smaller than she remembered, older, tired in a way that reached his eyes. I didn't know I was allowed to, Grace said. Her voice was quiet, but it landed like something dropped from a height. Her mother's head snapped up. What do you mean? Grace swallowed, her throat burned. Every time things got hard, she continued, forcing the words out, you both looked at me like I was supposed to understand. Like I wasn't supposed to need anything. Evelyn shook her head, tears already forming. Grace, you didn't say it, Grace interrupted gently. But I felt it. Her hands trembled under the blanket. She pressed them together to steady herself. You were stressed, Grace said. Dad was struggling, Mia was little. So I thought if I stayed quiet, it would help. Daniel's shoulders slumped. I thought being strong meant not feeling, Grace whispered, or at least not showing it. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to be another problem. Evelyn covered her mouth, a soft, broken sound escaping her. Oh, sweetheart, Grace finally cried. Not the silent tears she'd mastered over the years, but real ones, messy and uncontrollable. Her chest heaved as years of restraint collapsed all at once. I was so tired, she sobbed. I didn't know how to stop being strong. Her father moved then, slowly, like he was afraid one wrong step would shatter her. He sat beside the bed, his hand hovering before finally resting on hers. I failed you, he said, his voice breaking completely. Grace shook her head weakly. You didn't mean to? That doesn't make it hurt less, he replied. The truth settled heavily between them. Love had been there, listening had not. Evelyn leaned forward, pressing her forehead to Grace's hand. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have protected you. Not leaned on you, Grace closed her eyes. For the first time, her pain was not brushed aside, not misunderstood, not minimized. It was seen, and somehow that hurt and healed at the same time. Guilt doesn't scream, it sinks. Grace saw it in her parents' faces, the slow realization, the unbearable regret. I never meant to hurt you, her father said hoarsely. I know, Grace replied. That was the hardest part. Love existed in her family, it always had, but love without listening had nearly broken her. Lucas arrived later that night, breathless and pale. He took one look at Grace and pulled her into his arms. I'm here, he murmured. I should have been here. Grace clung to him, finally letting herself be the younger sister again. The house felt unfamiliar when Grace returned, not because it had changed, but because she had. Her parents hovered, unsure, careful in a way that felt both comforting and awkward. They asked questions now, real ones. How are you feeling? Do you need space? Can we help? Grace didn't always know the answers, but she appreciated being asked. Mia crawled into Grace's bed one night, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Are you sick? She asked quietly. Grace brushed her hair back, not like that.